Everything happened on November 13, 1999, in the city of Liverpool, England. Michael Moss was born in 1984 and never showed much interest in education. However, it could be confidently said that he was a technically skilled young man. Later, his mother, Liz, recalled that even at an early age, he could easily take apart his bicycle and then reassemble it, doing so without any particular reason. Perhaps that's why, as he grew older, Michael became fascinated with motorcycles. Additionally, the young man was always close to his father, and they had a strong and trusting relationship. Unfortunately, one day Michael's father suffered a brain hemorrhage, which changed him beyond recognition. Before this tragic incident, he was described as a kind and caring person. However, afterward he became irritable and aggressive. It's no secret that even the slightest brain damage can alter a person's behavior. So when Michael and his mother visited his father in the hospital, he often lost control, not only yelling at them for no reason, but also spitting in their direction. Apparently, these sudden changes and the deterioration of his father's mental state deeply wounded young Michael. And when the man passed away, his grief only intensified. As a result of this event, Michael's behavior began to change, and it seemed that his father's death had a profound impact on his mental health. For various reasons, he was even expelled from school and transferred to a special educational institution for troubled teens. However, Michael's behavior remained a significant problem, both for himself and his mother. Essentially, Liz was still grieving the loss of her husband and struggling to cope with her son's antics. Eventually, social workers suggested she temporarily place him in a children's home. This was done so that she could take a break and return to a normal life. Thus, in 1999, 15-year-old Michael was sent to an unusual children's home. This place was designed so that its residents could leave at almost any time of day or night, for example, to visit their parents. Besides Michael, about 25 other teenagers lived in the facility. Among them were other key figures in this case, 15-year-old Alan Bentley and Mark McKevitt. They were longtime friends, and like Michael, they had been expelled from school for severely beating another student and causing serious injuries. Although these two were somewhat of school bullies, they had never committed serious crimes outside of school and had no criminal records. At first, Michael tried to keep his distance from them, but eventually they formed a sort of friendship. Soon, a 16-year-old named Graham Neary joined the trio. Notably, at the time, Alan was dating a girl, but in October of that year, she decided to break up with him to pursue a relationship with Michael. This infuriated Alan, and from then on, he began plotting revenge against the young man. On November 12, 1999, Alan gathered his friends at his house to celebrate his 16th birthday. Among them were Mark McKevitt, Graham Neary, and another boy named Neil Breslin. According to reports, the teenagers drank strong alcohol and watched Quentin Tarantino's film Reservoir Dogs. At some point, Alan brought up the situation with his ex-girlfriend and Michael. He claimed that all he wanted was to beat Michael for what he had done. When Alan ran out of alcohol, he decided to act, and the others supported him. Around 1 a.m. on November 13, Mark called Michael, who was in his room at the children's home. Mark knew about Michael's passion for motorcycles and used this information to lure him into a trap. He asked Michael to meet him to check out a motorcycle he supposedly wanted to buy. Michael agreed and informed the staff that he would be leaving briefly. It's worth noting that Michael could leave the home whenever he wanted. The group agreed to meet in an alley on the outskirts of Liverpool. When Michael arrived, he realized that, besides Mark, Alan and Neil were also there. Moments later, the four headed to a nearby park, where Alan launched the attack. Without a word, he headbutted Michael, causing him to collapse to the ground. Alan then began delivering methodical and powerful blows to Michael's head with his fists and feet. Meanwhile, Neil stepped back, and Mark stripped Michael of his clothes, throwing them into a puddle. The boys then began kicking Michael in the groin and cutting his legs with broken glass. The beating lasted about an hour, after which the attackers went home. Graham had stayed at Alan's house during the first attack. When the others returned, they proudly told him how they had beaten and humiliated Michael, leaving him naked on the street. Just minutes later, the friends decided to return to finish him off. This time, Neil chose to stay behind. When Mark, Alan, and Graham entered the park, Michael was still lying on the ground in a dire state and in desperate need of medical attention. Instead, the teenagers resumed their assault. Mark yelled at Michael, demanding he stand up, but he couldn't. When they grew bored of beating him, they picked up shards of a broken bottle and began stabbing and slashing him, playing a twisted game of tic-tac-toe. They then treated Michael's head like a soccer ball, taking turns kicking it as if taking penalty shots. At one point, Alan even compared himself to the famous English footballer Michael Owen. It seemed the trio took great pleasure in the process, with no one willing to stop. Finally, Alan picked up a large shard of glass and attempted to cut off Michael's ear, recreating a scene from the movie they had just watched. In total, the two attacks lasted several hours. Later, the perpetrators claimed that in the final 10 minutes, Michael showed no signs of life. Around 3:30 a.m., Mark made an anonymous call to the police, reporting that he had found a lifeless body. However, when officers arrived, they found neither the body nor any evidence of a crime. It wasn't until around 7:30 a.m. that an elderly man walking his dog stumbled upon Michael's lifeless body and called the police. Investigators quickly identified Michael by checking the nearby children's home, where staff confirmed his identity. Meanwhile, Liz, Michael's mother, was at home listening to the radio. The morning news reported the discovery of a teenager's body in the park. Minutes later, she noticed a police car pulling up to her house. Liz immediately understood the reason for their visit. The officers delivered the devastating news that her son Michael had been killed in a brutal attack. Shortly after the discovery of Michael's body, Graham Neary, accompanied by his mother, went to the police station to confess. He claimed to feel intense guilt over what had happened, and not only recounted the events, but also named the attackers. Graham said he participated in the assault because he feared the others would turn on him if he didn't. Alan, Mark,
Однако
and
они с
Neil
самого
were
начала
promptly
отрицали
arrested,
свою
though they
причастность к
denied any
преступлению.
involvement from the start. This meant the police had to gather solid evidence to hold them accountable. While the four were in custody, officers searched their rooms at the children's home. Among Alan's belongings, they found several violent drawings resembling pages from a homemade comic. The illustrations depicted both Alan and Michael, with Michael's murder shown in gruesome detail. An autopsy revealed that Michael's injuries were nothing short of horrific. Both cheekbones were broken, and his nose was nearly detached from his skull. He had around 10 broken ribs, over 8 separate injuries to his head and face, and more than 50 on his body. While none of these injuries alone were fatal, their combined effect led to significant blood loss. Michael ultimately died from a broken neck. At the crime scene, investigators found shards of a broken bottle, which had clearly been used in the attack. Fingerprints on the shards matched those of
Однако они
Alan,
с самого
Mark,
начала
and Graham.
отрицали свою.
Additionally, the soles of their sneakers matched footprints left on Michael's body. With this and other evidence, the police had enough to charge Alan, Mark, and Graham with Michael's murder. The trial began in July 2000. Before this, Neil Breslin had pleaded guilty to involvement in the first attack. As a result, he was not charged with murder since he wasn't present during the second assault. The other defendants tried to claim that Michael had asked them to attack him so he could fake an insurance claim. However, the court dismissed this absurd defense, and all three were found guilty of murder. Alan and Mark McKevitt were sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Graham Neary received a 9-year sentence. All three have since been released. It's unclear what became of them afterward. However, I discovered that Neil Breslin was convicted several more times for lesser crimes. In one instance, he and an accomplice attempted to rob a house, but were fought off by the residents. In another, he was convicted of breaking a window at his girlfriend's home.